Welcome to Rad Solutions Lab, a mini series to share innovative solutions that will spark change and transform the current state of the social impact sector. If you missed episode 1, be sure to look back and check it out.
Today, we are talking about the 5 skill sets that organizations need to have now more than ever, and that we as a capacity building ecosystem should be investing in. These emerged from our recent impact study, the surveys and conversations we had, not only with organizations themselves, with capacity builders, as well as funders. And the 5 key areas that ended up emerging are funding models, business operations, collaboration, impact strategy, and inner strength. So we're going to go into more detail in all of these in a minute, but we have invited the incredible Alix Lebec to chat with us today about these and more. Alix is not only a partner in impact of Radical Partners, but also founder of Lebec and a champion of innovative finance for good. I'm just so grateful to have you with us today, Alix.
Thank you, Alia. I'm thrilled to be part of this conversation and really excited that you all are doing this because this conversation is so timely.
Thank you. Before we dive into these questions that I have prepared for us, I'd love for you to just take a moment to briefly introduce yourself. I know you have an incredible background and a little bit more about the work you're currently doing with Lebec.
Absolutely. So I'm Alix Lebec, the founder and CEO of Lebec. We are a women owned and led strategy firm that is really specialized in innovative finance to scale solutions to systemic global issues. And our team, which collectively has 20 years of experience across philanthropy, innovative finance, and entrepreneurship, has developed a framework that really helps asset owners and entrepreneurs understand how they can use the right kind of capital at the right time, right? How do we use that full spectrum of capital tools to scale solutions? And really, for me, Alia, that journey started at the World Bank 20 years ago in Paris and Southeast Asia, and really grew as I had the opportunity to work for the Clinton Global Initiative and then water.org. And then most recently, launch and build an impact investment manager called Water Equity that really demonstrated how blended capital approaches that use philanthropy and impact investing could scale solutions to a global challenge like the global water crisis. And one of the reasons I am so passionate about this work is that there is really something to be said about democratizing access to capital, tools, and knowledge in a way where an ecosystem of incredible entrepreneurs and asset owners can move more capital where it's needed. And so this is really the needle that threads or the through line that threads my whole experience.
Absolutely. And I think this is exactly why we wanted to have you here for this conversation, because you bring such a rich experience, but also perspective from working with so many different actors in the ecosystem. And so when we identified these 5 focus areas, it wasn't just about these are the skill sets that for impact leaders, change makers, social entrepreneurs should focus on, because it's the onus isn't just upon them. It's also upon us as an ecosystem that includes investors and funders, that includes the capacity builders themselves who are trained to help provide those skills. So I'm curious, why do you think that training organizations and elevating social impact leaders in these 5 areas matters more than ever today?
I think it's such a great question, Alia. And so first of all, these 5 areas are interconnected and very important, but I really want to lean into the funding model piece because, right now, a majority of nonprofits and even for profit entrepreneurs doing impact work, but particularly right now in the context of nonprofits, are overly dependent on traditional grant funding. And in our environment right now, as traditional funding sources are getting smaller and smaller, this is not a sustainable pathway. But even without that challenge, traditional grant funding cycles are restricted in many ways, right? So if you think about a nonprofit entrepreneur that has an exciting solution, It might take that entrepreneur 2 to 3 years to cultivate a relationship with a funder and really establish trust that's going to enable things to move forward. So 2 years, let's say minimum. Then you're asked to provide, proposal, and the decision on that proposal will probably take anywhere between 9, 12 to 24 months. So now you've waited 4 years to access a traditional source of grant funding. And then once that grant funding even comes through, it's restricted and it's not necessarily giving the flexibility and agility of a nonprofit to operate in a constantly changing environment and with sources of capital that allow you to finesse an idea and a solution to solve a problem. So, the way we fund the nonprofit ecosystem is not only not sustainable, but it's not allowing these entrepreneurs to fully bring their potential to life because they're so restricted by these funding sources. So, this is a really important time for nonprofits to diversify their revenue streams. And there are different options out there today. So, you might be a nonprofit that has a particular element of your business model that could be for profit and could be a source of revenue that you channel back into your nonprofit to have an additional source of funding, right? This is what social enterprises do. Or you might be a nonprofit that has identified an opportunity to solve a global challenge through an impact investing path because, once philanthropy has been used to prove a particular solution, maybe there's an on ramp for then impact investors to participate with another type of financing, right? And so we have to find a way to fund this really important ecosystem of entrepreneurs whose solutions benefit all of us with forms of financing that are allowing them to be agile, to have more flexibility in how they're funding their business models, and to be more sustainable. This is how we address market gaps. This is how we scale solutions. And this is how we reimagine the nonprofit business model. I'll add one more thing, Alia, which is something that we've been digging in this year that many nonprofits do not know is available to them, right? We know that by 2026, donor advised funds will have $2 trillion in assets under management. That is a massive source of capital. Nonprofits can have a donor advised fund on a platform like, let's say, like Impact Asset and have a flexible vehicle that is making impact investments and that is making grants in other organizations that can then become an extension of them. There's a way for that capital to be recycled and activated in a way where they are not necessarily married to just a direct service delivery business model that is so hard to scale and sustain, particularly in this environment. And so that funding element is so important. And I love that you asked that question.
You're watching Radical Solutions Lab. Stick around, there's a lot more ahead.
Our goal with this series is to add value to the social impact ecosystem by sharing some outcomes and concrete solutions that emerged from our Neighborhood Heroes impact study. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all of the episodes.
And we are back with Radical Solutions Lab.
I'm curious, what would you tell other funders, either in the philanthropy space or even in the more traditional investment space, to encourage them to adopt more innovative financing mechanisms or tools when investing in social impact?
So, the first thing I would say is that funders also have a vested interest in making sure that the nonprofits, the entrepreneurs that they are investing in, have a sustainable business model. When a funder chooses to make a multi-million dollar grant to an organization, they are investing in a vision, they are investing in a theory of change, in a solution to likely a complex systemic issue. And so foundations gain so much from making sure that they are taking a bet on a leader and a business model that can realistically sustain in the world of today. And knowing that many nonprofits are addressing problems that are $1 trillion challenges. And so we can't get there with just traditional philanthropy alone. So a funder has so much to gain from ensuring that that institution is providing a flexible grant that will allow that organization to explore different blended capital strategies that are aligned with what that nonprofit is trying to do. Secondly, foundations themselves, and I'll use US based foundations in particular, have many different tools that they could be using that can fuel innovative finance and blended capital strategies for nonprofits. So, for instance, a foundation, of course, has a grant budget. And let's say with that grant budget, a foundation decides to make a flexible philanthropic grant to prove the viability of an exciting solution to solve the water crisis, for instance, right? And then let's say that 5 years later, that solution is now ready to receive concessionary capital. So, a form of investment capital that might not generate market rate returns, but could generate 1% or 2%, while that foundation can support that next stage of this innovation of this solution with a program related investment. And then let's say 10 years later, that solution is now proven, it's scalable, and it's actually ready for commercial capital. Well, that foundation can further support the scale of that solution
Hmm.
with a mission related investment, which comes out of the endowment of the foundation, right? And the reason why this is good for a foundation is, let's say that you are an institution that deeply cares about the availability and the viability of water resources in communities around the world. If you're making grants to scale solutions that are providing access to water, but then your endowment is investing in oil and gas and is exacerbating water scarcity solutions, there's a mission conflict, right? We're not using all of the tools that are available to us to scale those solutions in a way where the very nonprofits that you are supporting are also adopting their business model to be able to pull from all of these different sources
Mm.
of financing. So, funders stand to gain by making sure that the solutions they are funding have a fighting chance of being sustainable over the long term. And that can only happen if we go beyond traditional grant funding.
And I think that also speaks to where we started the conversation, which is that these five skill sets or capacity areas that we're interested in deepening or exploring more are not mutually exclusive. They have to kind of all come together. You can't adopt innovative funding models or reimagine your revenue streams if you don't have strong business operations. You can't adopt these things if your impact strategy, which is, grounded in a strong theory of change, centered in values-based leadership, is really mission-driven and you have buy-in from your whole team, it also can't stand alone from those two others. Just like collaboration and inner strength, all of these things kind of have to exist as a whole if we're ever going to get to a place where our social impact organizations and the ecosystem as a whole can start to think about these things as less binary. I mean, when I hear you talk, it breaks you completely out of that shell of for-profit, nonprofit, right? This is one of the things that we're trying to break these silos. It's like we don't shouldn't just be talking about nonprofits, what they're not, but what they are. They're for impact. We're all for
Mhm.
impact. And so how can we get really creative about the way that we are shaping this investment in the capacity of these organizations?
Absolutely. And it's all interconnected. I think that, for these organizations, right? So, first of all, you have to meet organizations where they are, right? There isn't one solution or one
Right.
blended capital strategy that works for everybody. So you have to meet organizations where they are. Of course, you have to have leadership buy in. The examples that I have seen really succeed is when you have leaders inside the organizations that are advocating for this and doing the work versus this being pushed from the outside. But it also requires systems thinking. You can't look at these things, as you just said, Alia, in silos. How can you possibly create a global infrastructure to solve something like water and collaborate if you don't have the operational capacity to do that. And, this is how we have to think in philanthropy. We should be focused at this point on outcomes, and we should be focused on how do I generate the greatest amount of impact per dollar invested, right? How do I generate the greatest social return on my investment? Absolutely. But the way you can measure that is by putting your philanthropic resources behind approaches that at some point are no longer reliant on those philanthropic resources and are able to grow through other sources of financing, which means that philanthropic cost per person to impact a life or reach that impact decreases over time because at some point you no longer need philanthropy and other sources of capital are sustaining, an approach. So we have to be really focused on what are the outcomes that we want to
Yes.
generate. Impact is no longer something that's happening over here by a community of do-gooders, right? Impact, or I should say sustainability, is the business model for our global economy in general. And, water is something I always lean in because I spent such a big part of my career in water. But, over the next 5 years, we're looking at a future where our demand on water resources will exceed what is available to us by 40%. This is a problem for business. This is a problem for government, for policy, for, communities. So, investing in nonprofits in a way that will build sustainable solutions to something such as water isn't just a feel good initiative, right? It's about creating the
Right.
infrastructure we need for a sustainable economy. So, how we fund nonprofits through philanthropy really has to have that in mind. And I just want to give you a couple of examples.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, one of the companies that we've worked with, Reckitt, which is a Fortune 500 company, based out of the UK, exemplifies this, right? The company came to us and said, we know that Lebec's blueprint really looks at all the different capital tools and how to use them at the right time, what we call a portfolio approach to impact. So the request from Reckitt was help us understand how we can use our financial assets, including our philanthropy, in a more integrated and efficient way to reach our impact goals and even 10x our impact
Mm.
goals. So we built a roadmap that really identified here is where Reckitt can use its philanthropy to fuel new ideas. Here is where Reckitt can use its corporate balance sheet investments to scale proven ideas. Here are examples where then some of these ideas could be incorporated inside Reckitt's value chain, knowing that water is really important to your business. So I think really understanding the role of philanthropy in that kind of roadmap is so essential to s- to reach the kind of outcomes that we want. Given the urgency of these issues and the magnitude, and, this is just one example. You have other entrepreneurs, one in particular, SunCulture, that's proven the economic viability of solar powered water pumping technology.
Hmm.
Their efforts is funded by grant funding, debt, equity, and carbon finance. And as a result, they've been able to have a process in place where they have a pay as you grow formula for smallholder farmers across Africa so that they can afford this technology. And this solar powered water pumping technology has enabled rural farmers in sub Saharan Africa to increase their yields by 300% while
Wow.
reducing water consumption by 80%. So
Wow.
it gives you examples of where innovative finance is really scaling solutions in a more sustainable way, and how we're thinking about that both from the asset ownership side, so the funders, the investors, as well as the entrepreneurship side.
Yes. And the capacity that we can instill in entrepreneurs and in nonprofits to start thinking this way. It's a new skill, it's a new muscle. This is why I feel like
Yes.
if every social impact leader I knew had a few hours with you, Alix, we would all be in a better place. Um, I always learn so much from you.
Thank you,
I am
Alia.
so grateful for this, and there are a few things that really stuck out to me. One is that nonprofits are overly dependent on traditional grant funding, and we need to stop thinking about philanthropy as just one bucket over here and other sources of capital over here. I mean, something that you said that blew my mind is how can we use philanthropy to almost act as seed capital or like to pilot something. And then when something shows outcomes and shows success, we can lead to impact investment or debt financing, and really thinking about how we merge these different tools. And that DAFs are extremely undertapped and that nonprofits can have a DAF. I mean, we should have multiple seminars on this and trainings on this for nonprofits, because I think that most nonprofits see the word DAF and go, well, that's not for me. I don't even understand what that means. And that at the end of the day, even traditional philanthropic funders have a vested interest in helping their nonprofit grantees or for impact grantees gain access to these skills, because the more sustainable and successful they are, not only will they be a better steward of their grant funding, but they could lead to opportunities down the road that even the philanthropist funder isn't thinking of in terms of future investment opportunities, future growth opportunities to really make a dent. So I am just walking away with so much learning here.
Amazing, Alia. I love the way you summarize that. And, I will say there's a parallel here. If you think about innovations in traditional business sectors, so technology is subsidized, agriculture is subsidized,
Right.
right? So then we have this immense amount of philanthropic capital, at least $1 trillion out there, that is the only source of financing in the world that can take risk, that is focused on impact, and that has so much potential to scale proven ideas, scale or seed and scale, proven innovative finance pathways. And so, I just keep thinking, especially reflecting on all the work, that Radical Partners does as well. A fundamental shift in our industry has to be around what is the outcome that we are trying
Yes.
to achieve. Of course, nonprofits need top level talent. Of course, nonprofits need top level technology. You need a travel budget. You need time to nurse these relationships. You need time to build collaboration and relationships with local communities who have the solutions, right? Who have a demand, who are demanding for things that they need to be able to build a brighter future. And so all of these things take time, resources, and, a well thought out business model. Why would philanthropy not support that? It's narrow minded to think that philanthropy can just trickle in to execute a program. You need people to execute that program, and you need marketing to execute that
Absolutely.
program. And so we really have to focus on outcomes.
I think that is a beautiful place to end. I could not agree more. Alix, thank you so, so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for sharing your experience. And I hope we can do this again very soon.
Me too, Alia. Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
Thanks for watching. Share this content with someone who you think will benefit. And if something we discussed sparked your interest, reach out to us to accelerate impact together. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel, sign up for our newsletter, and follow Radical Partners on social media.